Blood was pooling on the cracked linoleum floor of the underground clinic faster than she could mop it up. The man on the stainless steel table hadn't said a single word since he kicked the alley door open, clutching a gaping, catastrophic wound in his abdomen. She didn't ask for his name. She didn't ask who shot him or why his suit cost more than her annual rent. She just threaded the needle, tied off the bleeding vessel, and saved his life while the rest of the city slept. 3 hours later, waking up in a fortified penthouse miles away, the undisputed head of the Rossi Syndicate looked down at his perfectly sutured skin and whispered 3 words to his lieutenant. Find that woman. The rain in South Boston was relentless that Tuesday night, hammering against the frosted glass of the clinic's narrow windows. Clara Bennett sat behind the reception desk, her textbook on advanced neuroanatomy open, though her eyes were completely unfocused. She was 26, 2 years out of a prestigious medical residency that she had been forced to abandon, and currently employed at a clandestine, off-the-books medical facility run by Dr. Harrison Miller, a man who had lost his license to a severe opioid addiction 5 years prior. It was 2:14 a.m. Harrison was passed out in the back office, snoring softly, leaving Clara to man the front. The clinic catered to the undocumented, the desperate, and the criminal, people who couldn't afford a hospital's bill, or worse, its questions. The heavy reinforced steel door at the back of the alley didn't knock. It burst open with a violent metallic clang. Clara was on her feet instantly, her hand instinctively dropping to the heavy iron flashlight beneath the counter. A man stumbled through the threshold. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and completely drenched. His dark wool overcoat was ruined, but it was the stark white dress shirt underneath that caught Clara's immediate clinical attention. It was saturated in a spreading, horrifying crimson. He didn't speak. He just locked eyes with her. His eyes were a piercing, cold slate grey, and despite the fact that he was rapidly bleeding out, there was absolutely no panic in them. It was the look of a predator temporarily inconvenienced by mortality. He took 2 steps forward, his boots leaving thick, muddy streaks of blood on the tiles, before his knees buckled. Clara caught him before his skull hit the floor. He was heavy, solid muscle and dense bone. Grunting with the effort, she dragged him toward the single trauma bay they kept prepped in the back. "Stay awake," she ordered, her voice completely devoid of the tremor she felt in her chest. She hoisted him onto the surgical table and immediately reached for her shears. Without asking for permission, she cut away the expensive fabric of his shirt, exposing the muscular plane of his abdomen. The entry wound was just below the right ribcage. "Bullet?" she asked, grabbing a pair of sterile gloves and snapping them on. He nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion. "Deflected," he rasped, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent a strange shiver down her spine. "Didn't hit the liver. I can feel it resting against the oblique." Clara didn't question how a civilian knew the exact anatomical trajectory of his gunshot wound. She grabbed a bottle of iodine and splashed it generously over the site. He didn't even flinch. "I have local anesthetic, but no general," she said, pulling a tray of sterilized instruments closer. "You're going to feel this. I have to go in and clamp the bleeder, or you're going to bleed out in my clinic, and I really don't want to mop that up." A ghost of a smirk touched his pale lips. "Do it." For the next 45 minutes, Clara operated with a mechanical, terrifying precision. She administered the lidocaine, grabbed her forceps, and went to work. The man, whose identity she actively avoided guessing, lay incredibly still. The only sign of his agony was the white-knuckle grip he had on the metal railing of the table, the veins in his forearms bulging like steel cables. She found the slug. It was a 9mm hollow point, mercifully slowed down by whatever it had hit before him. She extracted it with a metallic clink into a kidney basin. "Got it," she murmured, already moving to irrigate the wound. "You're lucky. A millimeter to the left, and your hepatic artery would be confetti." She began to suture him up. Her stitches were flawless, evenly spaced, the work of a surgeon who had been destined for the top of her class before life intervened. As she leaned over him, tying off the final knot, she felt his gaze burning into the side of her face. She looked down. He was watching her hands, his breathing stabilizing. "You don't shake," he noted quietly. "Neither do you," Clara replied, snipping the thread. "I'm going to get you a heavy dose of broad-spectrum antibiotics and a blood builder from the back. Do not move." She walked into the dispensary, taking exactly 3 minutes to gather the necessary vials and a clean set of scrubs they kept for transients. When she returned to the trauma bay, the table was empty. A trail of bloody footprints led to the back door, which was left slightly ajar, letting in the cold night air. On the metal tray, right beside the extracted bullet, sat a thick stack of $100 bills, soaked at the edges with his blood, and a heavy, matte black Zippo lighter with no insignia. Clara stared at the empty room, a deep, unsettling feeling sinking into her stomach. She had just saved a ghost. Declan Rossi woke to the blinding, sterile lights of his own private medical suite on the top floor of a fortified high-rise in downtown Boston. The pain in his side was a dull, throbbing ache, heavily masked by the morphine drip attached to his arm. "You're awake." Declan turned his head. Sitting in a leather armchair in the corner was Kieran Walsh, his second-in-command and oldest friend. Kieran looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His tie was undone, his suit rumpled, and a loaded Sig Sauer rested casually on his thigh. "The ambush," Declan forced out, his throat dry. "Taken care of," Kieran said, standing up and pouring a glass of water, bringing it to the bed. "The Moretti crew thought you were traveling light. They were wrong, but one of them got lucky before we put them in the ground. You vanished into the alleyways. We scoured the grid for 3 hours before one of our perimeter sweeps found you passed out in the back of an Uber heading back to the compound." Declan drank the water slowly, his mind racing, piecing together the fragmented memories of the night. The rain, the desperate run through the South End, the red neon sign of a rundown pharmacy that he knew hid a black market clinic. And then, her. He remembered eyes the color of dark honey, a focused, unwavering gaze that hadn't looked at him with the terror or sycophancy he was so accustomed to. He remembered the feeling of her hands, cool, incredibly steady, completely unafraid of the blood or the violent man bleeding it. Kieran was still talking. "Our private doctor, Dr. Aris, took a look at you when we got you up here. He was furious. Kept asking who did the field surgery." Declan's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because he said it was perfect," Kieran replied, raising an eyebrow. "He said whoever patched you up in whatever gutter you crawled into has the suturing skills of a Johns Hopkins chief of surgery. Saved your life, Dec. If they had fumbled the arterial clamp, you'd be in a morgue right now." Declan looked down at the thick gauze taped over his abdomen. A strange, possessive curiosity coiled in his chest. In his world, competence was rare, loyalty was rarer. But someone who possessed that level of elite skill, hiding in a filthy basement clinic at 2 a.m, asking 0 questions and demanding 0 answers. That was an anomaly, and Declan Rossi did not like anomalies operating in his city without his knowledge. "She was young," Declan murmured, almost to himself. "Late 20s, dark hair. Kept her cool while I bled all over her floor." He looked up at Kieran, his expression hardening into the mask that terrified the Boston underworld. "Find that woman." Kieran sighed, pulling out a tablet. "Deck, she saved you. Maybe we let the civilian walk away. You bring her into our orbit, you paint a target on her back." "I didn't stutter, Kieran," Declan said softly, the temperature in the room seemingly dropping. "Whoever set up that ambush knew my exact route. They knew I dismissed my detail. There is a leak in this house. I can't trust Dr. Orris, and I can't trust half the men on the payroll right now. I need someone competent who isn't connected to the syndicate. Find her." It took Kieran's men exactly 14 hours. Clara was locking up the clinic the following evening. Harrison had called out sick again, leaving her to handle the dregs of the day. The rain had cleared, leaving the Boston streets slick and reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights. She pulled her worn trench coat tighter around herself, her mind wandering back to the man from the night before. The bloody money was safely hidden beneath her floorboards, enough to pay off the next 3 months of her sister's specialized care facility bills. As she turned the corner onto her street, the hair on the back of her neck stood up. A black Cadillac Escalade was idling silently by the curb. As Clara quickened her pace, 2 more identical SUVs turned onto the street, blocking both ends of the narrow road. The street was suddenly entirely empty of pedestrians. Clara stopped, her hand reaching into her pocket, gripping a small canister of pepper spray, a pathetic defense against what was clearly a coordinated maneuver. The door of the center Escalade opened. Kieran Walsh stepped out. He didn't look like a street thug. He looked like a Wall Street banker, with the posture of a military sniper. He stopped 5 feet from her, keeping his hands perfectly visible. "Clara Bennett," Kieran said politely. It wasn't a question. Clara's heart hammered violently against her ribs, but she kept her chin up. "Who are you?" "I represent the man whose life you saved last night," Kieran said, his tone even, though his eyes scanned the street with predatory alertness. "He would like a word. I strongly suggest you get in the car." "And if I decline?" Clara asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Kieran offered a tight, sympathetic smile. "Miss Bennett, you are a very intelligent woman. You know men like us don't ask twice. Please, it will be a completely civil conversation, and you will be returned home safely." Clara looked at the dark tinted windows of the SUV. Running was pointless. Screaming was useless. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she let go of the pepper spray in her pocket and stepped into the back of the car. The drive took less than 20 minutes, but to Clara, it felt like a lifetime. The SUV bypassed the city center, winding its way up into the heavily wooded, ultra-wealthy enclaves of Brookline. They pulled through a set of massive wrought-iron gates, flanked by men who didn't bother hiding the earpieces or the tactical holsters beneath their jackets. She was escorted into a sprawling, modern mansion, all glass, steel, and dark mahogany. Kieran led her to a massive study at the back of the house, overlooking a cliffside view of the distant city skyline. Standing by the window, wearing a pair of dark slacks and a loose black silk shirt unbuttoned at the collar to accommodate his bandages, was her patient from the night before. Declan Rossi. In the harsh, fluorescent lights of her clinic, he had looked like a dying man. Here, in his domain, he radiated an overwhelming, suffocating aura of power and control. He turned around as the door clicked shut behind Kieran, leaving them alone. "Clara," Declan said, testing the name on his tongue. He walked slowly toward a mahogany desk, picking up a thick manila folder. "Have a seat." "I prefer to stand," Clara said defensively, crossing her arms to hide her trembling hands. "You wanted a word. I'm here. What do you want? If it's about the money you left, I consider it hazard pay." Declan chuckled, a low, rich sound that seemed completely out of place in the tense room. "Keep the money. You earned it. Actually, I brought you here to offer you a job." Clara stared at him. "I already have a job." "You have a death trap of a clinic run by a junkie," Declan corrected smoothly, tossing the folder onto the desk. It slid to a stop right in front of her. "Clara Bennett, top of your class at Harvard Medical, surgical residency at Mass Gen. You were a prodigy. And then, 2 years ago, you vanished. Dropped out entirely. No private practice, no hospital work, just working the graveyard shift, stitching up gangbangers and drunks." Clara's blood ran cold. She glared at the folder. "My private life is none of your business. When you put your hands inside my body, it became my business," Declan countered, stepping closer. The faint smell of expensive cologne and sterile alcohol washed over her. "Your father was a good man, Clara, but he was a terrible businessman. He borrowed a very large sum of money from some very bad people to keep his construction firm afloat. When he died suddenly, that debt transferred to your family. To you." Clara swallowed hard, tears of frustrated rage pricking the corners of her eyes. "I'm paying it off." "By working in a basement?" Declan asked, his voice softening just a fraction. "And what about your younger sister, Mia? Her cystic fibrosis treatments cost a small fortune every month. The men your father borrowed from, they aren't patient, Clara. They are animals. It's a miracle they haven't come to collect flesh yet." "Stop talking about my family," Clara hissed, stepping forward, her fear briefly, entirely eclipsed by anger. "Who do you think you are?" "I am the man who can make that debt disappear by tomorrow morning," Declan said flatly. The words hung in the air, heavy and intoxicating. Clara froze. She looked at him, searching his slate-grey eyes for the lie, the trap. "Why?" "Because someone in my organization tried to kill me last night," Declan said, his tone turning to pure ice. "And I have reason to believe my personal physician is on their payroll. I cannot trust the people inside my house. I need a doctor who is entirely off the grid. Someone brilliant, someone who doesn't panic, and someone whose loyalty I can buy." "You want me to be a Mafia doctor," Clara said, the absurdity of the situation finally crashing down on her. "I want you to be my doctor," Declan corrected, stepping into her personal space. The sheer size of him was intimidating, but he didn't reach for her. "You are on call for me and my inner circle exclusively. You move into the guest house on this property. You will have access to state-of-the-art medical equipment. In exchange, your father's debt is wiped clean. A multi-million-dollar burden, gone. Mia's medical bills are paid in full for the rest of her life, and you get a salary that will make you very comfortable." It was a literal deal with the devil. Clara knew that accepting meant crossing a line she could never uncross. She would be complicit. She would be property of the Rossi syndicate. But the crushing weight of the debt, the late-night panic attacks, the fear of men breaking into her apartment, watching Mia suffer because they couldn't afford the best treatments. "And if I say no?" Clara asked, her voice a mere whisper. Declan looked at her, and for a second, something deeply possessive flashed in his eyes. "You won't. You're too smart to turn down a lifeline, Clara, and I am too selfish to let you go." Clara looked at the folder, then back up at the ruthless, beautiful man standing before her. She took a deep breath, the scent of her old life fading away, replaced by the dangerous, metallic tang of the new one. "I have one condition," Clara said, her voice finally steadying into steel. Declan tilted his head, intrigued. "Name it." "My sister," Clara stated, her voice slicing through the heavy silence of the mahogany study. She did not break eye contact with Declan. Mia does not come here. She does not know about you, this syndicate, or how her bills are being paid. She gets transferred to the respiratory ward at the National Jewish Health Center in Denver, Colorado. Top-tier private security, entirely discreet. If she is ever touched by your world, the deal is off. Declan studied her. The audacity of a woman with nothing demanding terms from a man who owned the city was not lost on him. A slow, approving smile touched the corners of his mouth. He picked up his cell phone from the desk. "Kieran," Declan said quietly into the receiver. "Wire the outstanding balance for the Bennett estate. Then contact the administrative director at National Jewish Health in Denver. Secure a VIP suite for Mia Bennett. Indefinite stay, fully funded. Put 2 of our ghosts on her. External perimeter only. She breathes easy, or people stop breathing." "Understood." He ended the call and tossed the phone back onto the desk. "It's done. Your father's slate is wiped clean. Your sister leaves on a private charter jet tomorrow morning. Welcome to the family, Doctor." Within 48 hours, Clara's entire existence was rewritten. She was relocated to the sprawling guest house on the Brookline estate, a structure of glass and natural stone that was larger than any home she had ever set foot in. The basement of the guest house had been gutted and rapidly transformed into a state-of-the-art trauma center. Delivery trucks from McKesson Corporation and Siemens Healthineers arrived under the cover of darkness, offloading Stryker surgical beds, a portable ultrasound machine, and locked pharmaceutical cabinets stocked with everything from high-grade propofol to experimental synthetic blood volumes. She was no longer stitching up alleyway casualties. She was the sole keeper of the king's mortality. Declan's recovery was a tense, volatile process. He was not a man built for bed rest. By day 4, he was conducting syndicate business from the command center in the main house, his wound tightly bound, his face pale, but his mind relentlessly sharp. Clara visited him twice a day to change his dressings, administer his intravenous antibiotics, and check his vitals. These sessions were conducted in complete privacy. Kieran would stand guard outside the heavy oak doors, leaving Clara alone with the apex predator of the Boston underworld. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Clara reprimanded one evening, snapping her sterile gloves on. Declan was seated on the edge of a massive leather sofa, a map of the city's shipping ports spread across the coffee table in front of him. "The waterfront doesn't wait for my white blood cell count to normalize, Clara," Declan replied dryly, unbuttoning his shirt to expose the sutured ridge on his abdomen. The bruising had shifted to a deep, angry purple, but the incision site was impeccably clean. She knelt before him, her hands gentle but entirely clinical as she peeled back the surgical tape. "If you tear these internal stitches, all the ports in New England won't matter because you'll be bleeding out internally. I need you on bed rest." Declan looked down at her. She was so close he could smell the faint scent of lavender soap on her skin, a sharp contrast to the metallic smell of the iodine she was applying. "You are the only person on this property who gives me orders." "Someone has to keep you alive," she murmured, focused on her work. "And who keeps you alive, Clara?" he asked, the sudden drop in his vocal register sending a spike of adrenaline through her veins. Before she could answer, her eyes caught something amiss on the medical tray Kieran had brought in earlier. The tray prepared by the main house's pharmaceutical staff, nominally overseen by the syndicate's original physician, Dr. Orris. Clara reached for the pre-filled syringe of enoxaparin, a standard blood thinner meant to prevent post-surgical clotting. She held the syringe up to the light. The liquid inside was perfectly clear, as it should be, but the medical-grade seal on the plunger had a microscopic, jagged tear. It was a detail 99% of medical professionals would have missed. Clara, however, possessed an eidetic memory for structural anomalies. "Don't move," Clara ordered sharply, all warmth vanishing from her voice. Declan's posture instantly shifted from relaxed to lethal. "What is it?" Clara walked over to a portable chemical testing kit she had insisted on keeping in her jump bag. She expelled a single drop of the supposed blood thinner onto a testing strip and applied a reagent. The strip, which should have remained a neutral yellow, rapidly bloomed into a toxic, bruised violet. Her stomach dropped. She turned to Declan, holding the strip up. "This isn't enoxaparin," Clara said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "It's a highly concentrated synthetic potassium chloride compound. If I had injected this into your IV line, it would have stopped your heart in less than 60 seconds. It would look exactly like a sudden, fatal post-surgical myocardial infarction, a completely natural complication." Silence descended on the room, heavy and suffocating. Declan stared at the purple strip, the realization solidifying the icy rage in his chest. The leak wasn't just in his organization, it was in his house. The traitor had just tried to use his newly appointed doctor as the murder weapon. Declan stood up, ignoring the sharp pull in his abdomen. He walked past Clara, opened the heavy oak doors and looked at his second-in-command. "Kieran," Declan said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Lock down the estate. No one leaves. And bring Dr. Aris to the soundproof room in the cellar. Now." The atmosphere at the compound shifted from a high-security residence to an active war zone. Tactical teams equipped with Palantir tracking systems and heavy ballistic gear locked down the perimeter. Every camera was scrutinized. Every communication line was severed from the outside world. Clara stood in the corner of Declan's study, watching the ruthless efficiency with which the syndicate operated. She had saved his life twice now. The first time was instinct. The second time was calculated precision. Declan paced the length of the room, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. "They thought you'd just administer the dose blindly. They thought you were a scared, obedient girl who wouldn't question a pre-packaged syringe from the senior staff. They underestimated me," Clara said simply. Declan stopped and looked at her. "Yes, they did. A fatal mistake." He set the glass down. "Aris has been on my father's payroll for 20 years. If he flipped, the Moretti family offered him something I couldn't, or they threatened something he loves. If you torture him, he might just tell you what you want to hear to stop the pain," Clara interjected, her analytical mind overriding her fear of the situation. "Potassium chloride isn't something you just find in a standard medical cabinet here. It has to be ordered, logged and tracked through a DEA number. Aris is arrogant, but he's not invisible." Declan raised an eyebrow. "You want to investigate my own men?" "I want to ensure the man who tried to make me an unwitting assassin doesn't get away with it," Clara replied, stepping forward. "Give me access to the compound's pharmaceutical procurement logs. I know what to look for. The digital footprint of a lethal dose." Declan stared at her, seeing the brilliant, relentless spark in her eyes. She wasn't shrinking from the violence, she was navigating it. "Kieran," Declan called out. Kieran stepped into the room instantly. "Give Dr. Bennett full administrative access to the main house servers, whatever she needs." For the next 4 hours, Clara sat at a multi-monitor workstation in the security hub, tracing encrypted purchase orders. She cross-referenced the syndicate's shell companies with local medical supply deliveries. It was a labyrinth of dummy corporations, but Clara's mind was built for recognizing patterns. At 2 a.m., she found it. "Got it," Clara announced to the silent room. Kieran and Declan flanked her chair immediately. She pointed to a line of code on the screen. 3 days ago, a requisition was made under the guise of veterinary euthanasia supplies for the estate's guard dogs. The order was routed through a defunct pharmacy in South Boston, ironically, not far from my old clinic. The signature on the digital manifest belongs to Aris, but the receiving signature— Clara clicked the encrypted file, forcing it to unmask the final delivery destination. Belongs to Thomas Vance, Clara finished, reading the name on the screen. Wait, no. She mentally corrected herself, remembering the strict aliases in the underworld. Belongs to Thomas Sterling. No, that wasn't right either. She squinted at the screen, bypassing the aliases. It belongs to Elias Thorne. No, Elias Vance. Damn it, the encryption is cycling. She typed a rapid decryption command she had learned from a hacker patient years ago. The true name finally stabilized. It belongs to Silas Black. No, wait. Clara took a deep breath, clearing her eyes. The real name flashed in stark white letters. It belongs to Gregory Hale, your head of perimeter security. Kieran swore viciously under his breath. Declan didn't move a muscle, but the temperature in the room plummeted. Hale was the man responsible for the cameras, the gates, and the guard rotations. If Hale was the traitor, he had let the assassins know Declan's route the night he was shot, and he had helped Aris smuggle the poison into the medical bay. Aris wasn't the mastermind, Clara deduced quietly, looking up at Declan. He was just the hands. Hale is the architect. Before Declan could issue the order to apprehend Hale, the compound's perimeter alarms began to scream, a deafening, piercing wail that vibrated through the floorboards. The lights flickered and immediately cut out, plunging the massive estate into total darkness, save for the blood-red emergency strobes. "Hale knows we're on to him," Kieran shouted over the alarms, drawing his weapon. "He just cut the main feed and opened the front gates." Gunfire erupted from the front lawn, heavy automatic bursts that shattered the reinforced glass of the foyer downstairs. The Moretti Syndicate hadn't just bought a traitor. They had parked an assault team outside the gates, waiting for Hale to drop the defenses. "Kieran, hold the primary choke point at the stairs," Declan commanded, pulling a matte black Glock from the holster beneath his desk. He grabbed Clara's arm, his grip tight but grounding. "With me. Now." He dragged her out of the security hub, moving with terrifying speed down the dark, labyrinthine hallways of the second floor. The sounds of a brutal firefight echoed from beneath them. Men were dying on the marble floors of the estate. "Where are we going?" Clara gasped, struggling to keep pace as they bypassed the main staircase. "The panic room is compromised if Hale gave them the blueprints," Declan stated coldly, kicking open the door to the master suite. "We take the service elevator to the sub-basement tunnels. It leads out to the cliffs." As they crossed the threshold of the master suite, a shadow detached itself from the heavy velvet curtains. Gregory Hale stepped into the moonlight, filtering through the window, an assault rifle leveled directly at Declan's chest. "It's nothing personal, boss," Hale said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Moretti just pays a better retirement package." Time seemed to dilate. Declan shoved Clara violently to the floor, placing his own injured body between her and the barrel of the rifle. But before Hale could fire, Clara, operating on pure survival instinct, grabbed a heavy bronze statue from the bedside table and hurled it with all her might. It wasn't a lethal throw, but it was accurate. The heavy bronze slammed into Hale's forearm, knocking his aim wildly off-center. A burst of gunfire chewed through the drywall inches from Declan's head. That microsecond of distraction was all the apex predator needed. Declan closed the distance in a blur of motion. He didn't fire his weapon. He used it as a blunt instrument, bringing the heavy steel frame down across Hale's jaw with a sickening crack. Hale collapsed instantly. Declan stood over the unconscious traitor, his chest heaving, his slate-grey eyes wild with adrenaline. He looked down at Clara, who was on her knees, her hands trembling as she stared at the bullet holes in the wall. She had just saved his life. Again. Declan knelt in front of her, dropping the gun and taking her shaking face in his large, calloused hands. His thumb brushed a streak of drywall dust from her cheek. "You," Declan whispered, his voice rough and completely stripped of its usual icy control, "are the most dangerous thing in this house." The heavy bronze statue had dented the drywall, but the silence that followed the gunshot was far more deafening than the blast itself. Declan's breathing was heavy, ragged from the sudden exertion that threatened to tear his fresh sutures. He didn't look back at the unconscious form of Gregory Hale. His entire focus was anchored on Clara, who was still kneeling on the plush carpet, her chest heaving. Without another word, Declan hauled her to her feet. His grip was an iron vice, propelling her out of the master suite and down a narrow, hidden corridor concealed behind a mahogany bookshelf. They bypassed the main service elevator entirely, opting for a spiraling concrete stairwell that descended deep into the bedrock beneath the Brookline estate. The air grew damp and freezing. Above them, the muffled, percussive thuds of automatic weapons echoed through the floorboards. Kieran and the remaining loyalists were holding the line, turning the gilded mansion into a slaughterhouse. "Keep moving," Declan ordered, his voice echoing off the slick concrete. He produced a high-lumen tactical flashlight from a wall-mounted emergency box, the beam cutting through the pitch-black tunnel. "You're bleeding again," Clara noted, her clinical detachment fighting a desperate battle against her surging adrenaline. She pointed to the dark stain blooming against his black silk shirt. The physical altercation with Hale had undoubtedly popped a stitch. "It can wait," Declan gritted out. They emerged 20 minutes later, through a rusted iron grate concealed within the thick brush of the Olmsted Park system, miles away from the compromised compound. A nondescript, matte black Audi A8 was parked under the canopy of weeping willows, waiting in the shadows. Declan unlocked it with a biometric scan on the door handle. "Get in," he commanded, sliding into the driver's seat despite his injury. Clara strapped herself in as the V8 engine roared to life. Declan didn't turn on the headlights. He navigated the winding, rain-slicked roads of the park, using only the ambient glow of the city skyline, driving with a reckless, terrifying precision. They bypassed the main arteries of Boston, weaving through the industrial graveyard of Everett, until they reached a brutalist concrete warehouse nestled between two active shipping yards. The heavy steel bay doors rolled up automatically as they approached, swallowing the Audi before slamming shut, plunging them into the harsh glare of fluorescent halogens. This was not a home. This was a war room. The warehouse was retrofitted with reinforced steel plating, satellite communication arrays, and a fully stocked armory. Half a dozen men in tactical gear lowered their weapons when they saw Declan step out of the vehicle. "Boss?" A broad-shouldered man named Sullivan approached, his face grim. "We lost contact with the main house. Kieran's transponder is dark." "Kieran knows the protocol," Declan said, leaning heavily against the hood of the car, his face draining of color. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving only the agonizing reality of torn tissue and internal bleeding. "Lock down the ports. Ground all private charters out of Logan. Victor Moretti thinks he won tonight. I want every business he owns burning before sunrise." Clara didn't wait for permission. She grabbed a med kit from the trunk of the Audi, a standard fixture in all syndicate vehicles, and walked right up to the most dangerous man in New England. "Take the shirt off," she demanded, her voice cutting through the gruff murmurs of the heavily armed men. Sullivan stepped forward, a scowl on his face. "Hey, lady, you don't talk to—" Declan raised a single blood-stained hand. Sullivan immediately stepped back, his jaw snapping shut. Slowly, Agonizingly, Declan stripped off the ruined silk shirt. Clara's professional assessment was instantaneous. 2 internal sutures had snapped. Blood was pooling beneath the fascial layer, threatening to rupture the external stitches. She directed him to a stainless steel workbench, sweeping a pile of topographic maps onto the floor to make room. For the next hour, the warehouse was dead silent, except for the harsh, ragged sound of Declan's breathing and the metallic clink of Clara's instruments. She worked under a makeshift surgical lamp, administering local anesthetic, reopening the wound, clearing the hematoma, and resuturing the muscle wall with a thick, unforgiving nylon thread. "You are reckless," Clara whispered harshly, tying off the final knot. Her hands, covered in his blood for the second time in a week, were trembling, not from fear, but from the sudden, overwhelming realization of what he had done. He had thrown himself in front of a loaded assault rifle for her. Declan looked up at her, his slate-grey eyes heavy with pain, but burning with an intensity that made her breath catch. He reached out, his large hand wrapping around her wrist, smearing his blood against her pale skin. "I protect what is mine," Declan said, the gravel in his voice sending a shiver down her spine. "And you, Doctor, are mine. Not because of a debt. Not anymore." Before Clara could process the weight of that declaration, the encrypted satellite phone on the workbench shrilled. Declan answered it on speaker. It was Kieran. "I'm breathing." Kieran's voice crackled through the secure line, accompanied by the sound of sirens in the distance. "The estate is heavily damaged, but the Moretti assault team is neutralized. We have Hale. He's missing a few teeth, but he's talking." "Give me the damage," Declan demanded. "It's worse than Aris or the poison," Kieran said, his tone devoid of its usual dark humor. "Hale wasn't just bought by Moretti. He orchestrated your father's death 5 years ago, December. He's been feeding our shipping manifests to the feds and the rival families to weaken the foundation. And Clara..." Kieran paused. Clara's heart stopped. She stepped closer to the phone. "What about Clara?" Declan's voice was lethal. "Hale knew about the Denver transfer," Kieran revealed. "The Moretti family sent a specialized hit squad to the National Jewish Health Center. They're targeting the sister to force your hand." A sound escaped Clara's throat, a raw, terrified sob. Mia, her fragile, brilliant younger sister, lying in a hospital bed 1,000 miles away, completely defenseless. Clara turned blindly toward the door, her mind fracturing with panic, but Declan's arm shot out, catching her waist and pulling her hard against his chest. "Let me go!" Clara screamed, fighting against his iron grip. "I have to call the hospital. I have to warn them." "Listen to me," Declan roared, his voice echoing off the concrete walls, silencing her struggles. He framed her face with his hands, forcing her to look into his eyes. "Do you think I'm a fool, Clara? Do you think I send the most valuable person in my life out of my sight without a guarantee?" Clara froze, tears streaming down her face. "What did you do?" Declan hit the unmute button on the phone. "Kieran, confirm the status of the Denver asset." "Confirmed, boss," Kieran replied. "The Moretti hit squad breached the hospital perimeter 10 minutes ago. They never made it to the elevator bank. The Blackwater private military contractors you embedded as hospital orderlies and ICU nurses eliminated the threat. Mayor Bennett slept through the entire thing. The local police are being fed a story about a foiled gang robbery. She is safe." Clara collapsed against Declan, her legs giving out completely. He caught her, holding her tightly against his uninjured side, resting his chin on the top of her head. He had surrounded her sister with a ghost army. He had anticipated the worst-case scenario before it even formulated in her mind. "The debt your father owed?" Declan murmured against her hair, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low frequency meant only for her. Hale fabricated it. He forged the ledgers to steal your family's real estate assets after he drove your father to an early grave. You never owed this syndicate a dime, Clara. We owed you." Clara pulled back, looking up at the ruthless Mafia boss. The fear she had harbored since the night he bled on her clinic floor evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline fury. The men who had destroyed her family, who had forced her out of her residency and into a basement clinic, were the same men who had just tried to murder her sister. "Victor Moretti," Clara said, her voice devoid of tears, replaced by a terrifying, surgical detachment. "And Gregory Hale." Declan saw the shift in her eyes. It was the same cold, calculating gaze she had when she was digging a bullet out of his flesh. "What do you want, Doctor?" "I want them excised," Clara stated simply. "A complete, radical tumor removal." Declan Rossi smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful sight. "Suit up, Sullivan," Declan commanded the room. "We're going to war." The retaliation orchestrated from the Everett warehouse was not a chaotic, sprawling street war. It was a masterclass in systemic, ruthless eradication. Declan did not merely want the rival syndicate broken. He wanted their legacy completely erased from the city's memory. He operated with the cold, detached precision of a surgeon, excising a malignant tumor, utilizing a deeply embedded network of financial ruin and overwhelming tactical violence that left the underworld trembling. Dr. Bennett refused the safety of the reinforced panic room. Instead, she remained stationed at the makeshift command center on the warehouse floor, her medical jump bag resting by her feet. She stood alongside Desmond, the syndicate's lead intelligence operative, monitoring the glow of a dozen high-definition tactical screens. Through the encrypted biometric telemetry suits worn by the strike team, she watched the vital signs of the men executing the assault. She had spent the last 5 years of her life desperately trying to save people from the violence of this city. Now, she was actively overseeing its distribution, ensuring the King's men remained lethal and functional. By 4 a.m., the rival empire was systematically dismantled. Sullivan's tactical units moved through the city like phantoms. They planted heavy concentrated incendiary charges in the enemy's contraband warehouses, reducing millions of dollars of illicit cargo to white-hot ash before the fire department even received an alarm. Simultaneously, a team of offshore financial hackers breached the rivals' Cayman accounts, draining vast fortunes and rerouting the funds into untouchable anonymized crypto ledgers. The enemy boss, stripped of his wealth, his supply lines, and his soldiers in a matter of hours, retreated in desperation to his final stronghold, a heavily fortified penthouse overlooking the harbor. Declan led the final breach himself. "Primary barricade compromised," Desmond narrated quietly, tapping rapidly on his keyboard as the digital blueprint of the penthouse flashed on the main screen. "They are in the elevator shafts." Bennett watched the singular blip representing Declan. His heart rate, displayed in bright green numerals on the monitor, remained terrifyingly steady, a resting baseline of 62 beats per minute. He was ascending into a heavily armed fortress, nursing a freshly resutured abdominal wound, yet his physiological response was that of a man sitting down to dinner. He was the apex predator, reclaiming his absolute territory. "Top floor secured," Sullivan's gruff voice finally crackled over the encrypted radio feed, accompanied by the distinct, sharp sounds of shattered safety glass and heavy boots on marble. 4 hostiles neutralized. Target acquired in the master office. Through the ambient audio feed, Bennett could hear the ragged, terrified breathing of the rival boss. The man who had ordered the hit on her sister was backed into a corner, his empire reduced to smoke and digital dust. "You break the old council's rules," the rival wheezed, his voice laced with absolute panic. "You execute ahead of the table. The commission in New York will hunt you down. You will burn for this." "The commission gave me their blessing 20 minutes ago," Declan's baritone voice replied through the feed, echoing with a lethal, icy calm that made the hairs on the back of Bennett's neck stand up. "You brought a traitor inside my own house. You sent an armed hit squad to a respiratory hospital to target an innocent civilian. You broke the old laws first, and the commission recognizes my right to collect." Two muffled, heavy, suppressed shots echoed through the radio. The terrified breathing ceased entirely. Bennett did not flinch. She kept her eyes locked on Declan's vitals. The green numbers did not spike. The execution was handled with the same clinical necessity as tying off a bleeding artery. "Target neutralized," Declan announced into the comms. "Scrub the security feeds. We leave no ghosts." When the matte black tactical vehicles rolled back into the Everett warehouse 2 hours later, the pale, cold light of dawn was just beginning to break through the high frosted windows. The heavy steel bay doors slammed shut, sealing them off from the waking city. Declan stepped out of the lead vehicle. His dark tailored suit was immaculate, perfectly concealing the violence he had just orchestrated, and the fresh bandages wrapped tightly beneath his shirt. He handed his suppressed weapon to a waiting enforcer and walked deliberately across the concrete floor. The atmosphere in the warehouse shifted palpably. The hardened killers, the loyal syndicate soldiers who had just burned a rival empire to the ground, immediately parted for Bennett, offering her a wide, silent perimeter of profound respect. She was no longer the desperate, indebted doctor pulled from a basement clinic. She was the woman who had stood her ground while the estate was breached, the woman who had bled for the boss and anchored the command center while the city burned. Declan stopped directly in front of her. The adrenaline of the night was finally fading, leaving a shadow of deep exhaustion in his slate-gray eyes. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and withdrew a thick, heavy leather folio. Without a word, he placed it onto the stainless steel workbench beside her medical instruments. Bennett opened it slowly. Inside, she found the original notarized deeds to her late father's commercial construction firm. Beneath those were the clear titles to the family estate properties that had been ruthlessly seized 5 years ago. Finally, pinned to the back of the folio, was a certified international banking document showing a staggering multi-million-dollar deposit into an untouchable trust fund placed entirely under her sister's name. "Gregory Hale's private offshore accounts," Declan explained quietly, his voice raspy from the night's demands. "Liquidated and returned to their rightful owners. Hale fabricated the debt that destroyed your father. He forged the ledgers to steal your family's assets from the inside. You never owed this syndicate a single dime. Your father's legacy is yours again. Your sister is safe permanently, and her care is funded for life. The men who hunted your family are dead." Bennett stared at the documents, her brilliant mind struggling to process the monumental shift in her reality. The crushing, suffocating weight of the last 5 years, the late-night panic attacks, the degradation of working in a black market clinic, the constant, lingering terror of collection, evaporated in a dizzying wave. She was a wealthy woman. She had the financial power to finish her residency at the top of her class. She was entirely, irrevocably free to walk out of the warehouse and return to the sunlit world she had been exiled from. She looked up at Declan. He stood perfectly still, his broad shoulders tense, his hands resting at his sides. He had given her everything, including the unbarred door to walk away. "You're releasing me," Bennett stated, the the words echoing loudly in the quiet space between them. "You fulfilled your end of the bargain," Declan replied, his jaw clenching slightly. "The fabricated debt is nullified. You are a brilliant elite surgeon. You do not belong in the shadows, waiting for monsters to bleed out." Bennett slowly closed the heavy leather folio. She ran her hand over the smooth, dark cover, letting the reality of her newfound status settle into her bones. She was no longer a victim of circumstance. She had agency. She had immense power. And as she looked at the undisputed king of the Boston underworld, a man who had taken a bullet meant for her without a second thought, she realized exactly what she wanted to do with that power. She stepped away from the workbench, closing the physical distance between them. She reached up, her steady, surgical hands sliding boldly over the lapels of his dark suit, resting flat against his solid chest. She could feel the steady rhythm of his heart beneath the expensive fabric. "You are absolutely right," Bennett whispered, her voice dropping to a fierce, unwavering tone that commanded the attention of every man in the room. "I do not belong in a basement clinic. I belong at the absolute pinnacle of my field, and this syndicate cannot survive with a medical director who can be bought or blackmailed. You need someone who ensures the king never falls." Declan inhaled sharply, the rigid control he had maintained all night instantly fracturing. His large hands came up to grip her waist, pulling her flush against his solid frame, ignoring the sting of his fresh wounds. "If you stay," Declan warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous, possessive growl, "there is no walking away. You become a permanent, untouchable fixture in my world. You become my equal. I will never let you go." "I am not asking for your permission," Bennett replied, her dark eyes flashing with a ruthless, calculated fire that perfectly matched his own. "I am delivering a diagnosis. You are stuck with me." Declan brought his mouth down on hers, a crushing, desperate kiss that tasted of absolute victory and unyielding loyalty. It was an unbreakable vow sealed in shadow. The frightened, indebted girl was gone forever. In her place stood the matriarch of the syndicate, a woman wielding immense hidden authority, holding the life of the devil himself in the palm of her unshaking hands. If you were absolutely captivated by Clara and Declan's descent into power, loyalty, and undeniable passion, we have so much more waiting for you. The dangerous world of underground empires and high-stakes romance is full of secrets, and this is just the beginning. Did you anticipate the massive betrayal within Declan's own house, or the ruthless lengths he would go to protect Clara's sister? Let us know your favorite twist in the comments below.